Hey, what's up? It's your boy Charles here, and in today's video, I've got my good friend Robert. Robert, how's it going?
Good, man. It's good to be back. I think I was one of your first interviews, probably, right?
You were actually our very first interview, and you're still. I was just looking at our stats the other day, actually, and you're still the highest viewed
Oh,
guests. Yes, so you let's see what we get. Let's see what numbers we get on this one. So yeah, no, it's
sounds
good.
good.
So we're going to delve in today and talk about crypto and Web 3.0. So Robert's been really delving into the space over. I'm not sure how long have you been kind of looking into this, Robert, and
Yeah,
kind of
so I think by a lot of measures, I was pretty late to the party. I started paying attention to the whole space in about, I think, May of last year. So it's like 18 months. Well, coming up on 18 months, I suppose, but a bit more than a year, and been actively sort of working in the industry for about 1 year.
yeah. Yeah, so we've been basically having some, private chats and talking about various things. I was kind of heavily invested in the space myself, just from an investor point of view, and it was interesting to get the kind of differences as someone who was an investor versus someone who is effectively working with various projects and as a marketer. So wanting to kind of bring that conversation online, give some value to you guys, and see where we go from there. So, Robert, firstly, let's really start at the kind of the basics, because in terms of the overall space, we saw a bull market. Then now we're in a kind of bear market. So there isn't as much kind of hype at the moment surrounding different projects, and inevitably a lot of people leave the space. So there isn't as much news for kind of the newbie.
Mhm.
So let's kind of dissect firstly kind of the difference between, you've got this new evolving sphere called Web 3.0, and we are currently in Web 2.0. So let's kind of dissect the difference between the two, if you could,
Mhm.
and then just kind of explain, how you see things from there.
Yeah, sure. So I think the best explanation that I've seen, the way that it's been really distilled to the sort of core benefit of sort of why it exists in the first place, is Web 1. If you think about a file on your computer, right? You can have read access and you can have write access, right? So read access means you can view the file, but you can't edit it. And that's how people saw kind of Web 1. It was difficult to create things on the internet, like creating a website, creating content. We didn't have social media. So that was Web 1. That was about reading. Of course, you could make a website, but it was very difficult, right? So Web 1 was about the reading. It was about consumption. Then we got social media, and it became a lot easier to create blogs. We had all WordPress and these sorts of platforms that allowed people to create. So that's the write access. So Web 1 was read, Web 2 was write. It became a lot easier to produce content, not just consume, and products and things of that nature. And then we get to Web 3, which they summarize as own, right? So you got read, write, and own. So own is about the ability to own property on the internet. And so with that, it kind of changes a lot of things, right? Which we will sort of discuss today. But I don't see a world where technology starts to reverse, right? Like we're getting, technology is just innovating all the time, and it's consuming our lives more and more and more. And so I just don't see that trend reversing. And so if you think about that, it's like, I just don't see a world where it doesn't make sense for people to be able to own things on the internet and prove that ownership. Because, I heard a professor from like some California university the other day, and he was asking his class every semester, is like, who thinks they have the most screen time here? And there would always be a couple of people, like 9 hours a day. It's like we're living online so much these days that some of the things that we have in the offline world has to be transferred over because we're spending so much of our time. And I also think that a lot of these things are not new. It's just a better way to do them. And what I mean by that, as an example, is, I used to play this shitty game called Tibia back in the day, and it was funny. This was like early 2000s, and this game was kind of crappy even back then, but it was a multiplayer game. It was fun. You'd have this character, you build it up, and you had like an in-game currency, and you had you had like a warrior, and you could buy like a different sword or a weapon, and the shields and all these things, and they had value. But yeah, this was really funny. I specifically remember, in order to get a premium account, me and my friends living in Sweden at the time, we would have to go to the currency exchange office, get some US dollars, put them in an envelope, send them to Germany where the company was, and they would like manually upgrade you to a premium account. So that's how ancient that was. But the point I wanted to make here was that me and my friends, we would build up these characters, and the items that we had in the game, they had value to other people, and we could sell them for real money, and we did. It was just inefficient. It was done. You had to trust the other person. There wasn't an exchange where we could do it officially. It was, everything was kind of like over the counter kind of thing, and you couldn't trust them. It's not like we were using like an escrow service or something like that. So things like that have always been done, right? It's not a new thing that's being done. It's just a much more efficient way to do it. And one of the main things there is the fact that you can remove trust from the equation, right? So if I want to sell you my character, or if I want to sell you my shield, I can do that, but I don't need to trust you. And I can just put it up on, some kind of marketplace that each game usually has, and sell it to you. And then there's sort of in-game currency, and value is really often about perception, right? So if I'm playing a game with 10 million other people, and it's like played in a city, and there's like a hotspot in the city, like, to me, that hotspot is going to have value. So like, if I can own that piece of property, and maybe in the game you need to like, have a house to live, maybe you need to pay rent. So you could own a property in a game and collect rent through the in-game currency. And like, that's just sort of the entertainment side. There's other non-entertainment use cases, obviously, but that's kind of how I see it. Like, so I think a lot of people look at Web3 as completely revolutionary. I actually don't see it that way. What I do see it is that it allows us to do things that we have been doing before, but it just allows us to do it in a proper way. So I think I actually don't think it is tremendously revolutionary in terms of like the problem it solves, because the problem has already been solved in many cases. In some cases not, but some of those problems have already been solved, and we're just solving them in a better way, So that's kind of how I like to think of read, write, own. And it allows you to, a lot of things basically end up becoming decentralized. And if you put out a piece of content, then you can actually own that piece of content. You can sell that piece of content, because things have value on the internet, even though, the joke is that you can screenshot an NFT, right? And it's like, oh, now I have it too. But there's value in things online. And so being able to own them also has value and makes sense. And, having digital currency also makes sense. How does it, again, coming back to how much time we spend online, how does it not make sense to have like digital money? Like we have to have digital money. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think the biggest thing that I see, and the biggest benefit, is at the moment, when it comes to earning, big tech take the biggest slice of the pie, as such. Whereas now it's kind of for the end user. You could, like you said, you can own an element of that, and you can actually get paid for the content or the game that you play in that respect. So that completely makes sense.
I think also a lot of times, like, the end user was the reason why something succeeded, right? So you take YouTube, for example. YouTube doesn't succeed without the creators that were on the platform early, putting out content, making it into a place that people wanted to come and watch videos. And so they never got a piece of the upside, even though they deserved it, because they really helped build it. And so that's what Web3 also brings, is that you give people a piece of the upside that they help create, and they didn't really get that before. So that's another really cool thing that comes out of this.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's going to be interesting to see how certainly companies evolve as well, because I think once people understand that they can, like you said, they can own some digital real estate, or they can earn from the content they produce on a greater percentage. You know, you can still earn YouTube revenue, but it's, again, the company as such is making the larger, or owning the larger share of that. So it's going to be interesting to see how some of these companies like YouTube, Facebook, Meta evolve, and whether they do, and the distinction between the two.
And let me throw another example in here as you were talking about that, because I think we lose a lot of people when we talk about digital real estate and that sort of thing, which I understand, because it's like I'm not really into that either. Like the gaming example is just an example, but it's not really something that I get excited about. But think about this, right? So very recently, I went through the process of getting a mortgage and buying a house, right? That process, I have pictures somewhere, like the stack of papers that I had to produce to go and apply for mortgages. No joke, it was about this thick, the amount of papers. Now, this is Eastern Europe, mind you, so it's not that inefficient everywhere in the world. But the process took about 8 months, and there's effectively two big hurdles, right? One is the application and acquisition of the mortgage, and the second thing is the government side of sort of transferring the ownership of the property that you live on, right? That whole thing, and there's still a bunch of trust involved. Like if I wanted to, I could have forged documents that I submitted to the bank. I could have easily faked them, right? Right click, inspect element. Like you log into your bank. Here's a hack, guys. If you wanna fake a screenshot, log into your bank account, right click on the number, click inspect element, and on the right side, you'll be able to change that number to whatever the hell you want. You can take a screen, right? I could have easily done that. I did not do that because I didn't need to, right? But you see, the point I was making here, there is still trust involved. The bank still has to trust that I'm actually submitting real documents. Some of it they can verify, some of it they can't. So digital real estate, I understand. That's kind of like a far-fetched thing that a lot of people don't get. But what if the process of getting a mortgage and buying a house, instead of taking 8 months, could be done in 1 hour? And here, I'll add some more stuff. Because of the way that some people work today, like you and I, where we don't have the traditional, I have an employer, I have a contract, I have a salary, which is what the bank's going to want to see. So I'm limited in that sense, right? I work a little bit differently. I've got consulting clients from all over the world. They're paying me in currencies that is not the local currency in the country that I live in. There's things like that. And so that's a problem for these banks, because that's not how they're used to operating. And also, I can't really go outside of the country that I live in to go get a mortgage.
No.
So there are companies today. One of the DeFi projects that I'm really excited about is called Teller. They've officially done the first mortgage in Texas, where I believe it was the decentralized finance organization that actually issued the mortgage. But what this does is, for example, you could open up the entire world. Like for me to go get a mortgage, instead of being limited to the market of the country that I'm in, all of a sudden we could open up the entire world, where I could get the mortgage either from some type of organization like a DeFi platform or something like that. But also I could maybe crowdfund it through private people. Maybe I get 50 people in 1 hour to fund my mortgage. And then through a smart contract or something like that, maybe I'm receiving my salary on chain, which is like through one of my consulting clients. I'm actually getting paid like every 6 hours on chain automatically. So there's a public track record of the money that I'm making. So what if through a smart contract, we're distributing the monthly mortgage payment that I'm making, right, to these 50 people. I don't have to lift a finger. My salary comes in on chain, gets distributed to the 50 people. They're making money off of me. And so that's like the mortgage side, right? So I see benefits there, right? We're opening up the entire world and we're making it much faster. And also, which is better for the bank side of things, we're actually removing trust. There's going to be less fraud because it's on chain. And then what about the transfer of the actual deed itself? So that's where I think things are going to take a little bit of time, because now you actually need the governments to work on it. So who knows, man, 15, 20 years maybe from now. But what if the actual land deed of the property that I live on, what if that was also on some sort of government blockchain? And that if I didn't make my mortgage payment, we could, fractionalize the ownership of that. So the actual house and the land deed itself is sort of collateral. And if I don't make my payments, then automatically they receive, through an NFT, fractional ownership of the property that I own, which they can then go sell on the market somehow. I think that's a much more sort of use case that's kind of, people can really relate to, because again, we're taking something that's already being done today, but we're doing it in a slightly better way. Instead of this whole thing taking 8 months and being a huge pain in the ass, we got it down to 1 hour. We remove trust from the equation, and everybody's happy. And we also open up the entire world for me to go get a mortgage, right? Because I don't work in the traditional way that most people work. How can you have a problem with that, right? Like that's better for literally everybody involved.
Yeah. There's endless options. For me, I look at it for the finance side of things, like having full ownership of your finances, because at the moment, what do you do with your money? You put it with a third party in a bank, and you make minimal interest.
Can be confiscated too.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, there's been situations with crypto where a lot of these centralized entities have come in, and we saw it with the likes of Celsius, Voyager, where they've been perceived as being credible for the people, and behind the people's backs, they were effectively
probably all in on Luna or something along those lines.
Exactly.
But yes. But the point I think you're touching on here is that, that's the centralized exchange, right? Which we have in crypto too. But at least now we have the option to be a sovereign individual who is in control, where I have a hardware wallet and I'm in full control of my own property and currency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think with I've not looked into it too much, but with Ethereum 2.0, being able to stake and be your own validator is an option now. But yeah, you need to do your due diligence, with these things. If you're being fully responsible for your own finances, and you're not using any centralized or third party exchange, then you need to know what you're doing. I think that's the thing. It's the barrier at the moment, the barrier to entry, or like kind of the education barrier is high. Like, it takes just to even understand what the space is about, because it's constantly evolving, is challenging. So for the the average person who has no experience in it, it's difficult to navigate. So I think in order to, we need to be able to simplify these things down so that the adoption can be, faster in that respect. But
100%.
I think these things will come, as the next, more applications are coming on that are more user friendly. And I think over time that will help. So
look, I think there's a reason that there's a fraction of the population that has gone into crypto already. And it's not necessarily, I think, because it's solving some kind of pressing issue for them today. I think it's more because we are people who are excited about what's going to come, right? We can see the vision. And so we're more here from a hope angle. We're like, hey, I see where this is going. I'd like to be a part of this. There's probably financial upside if I get in earlier, that sort of thing. I think if you're talking about, let's say, mass adoption, I think that's going to really come from use cases, right? Where it's solving some kind of problem that somebody has, and it's done in a way where you don't need to give a shit about whether it's Web3 or Web2, or like you don't need to understand any of it. It's just all you know is I have a problem. This platform, this product solves my problem for me. How do I use it? And from there, that will get more and more people to adopt it. So again, if let's say that mortgage example that I gave, let's say that existed right now, both on the mortgage side and the transfer of the deed side. So if you were going in to go buy a house, if you had two options, like, hey, you can go this way. It's going to take you 8 months. It's going to be a lot of back and forth with whatever your financial advisor. You're going to print 100 documents, blah, 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 blah. Or you could just send it an application here. Just show proof of income, like show all the same things. It's going to take about, you'll have the house tomorrow. Then it's like, well, I'd probably go with that option, right? Like if the outcome is the same, let's just say for argument's sake, why would I go with the old way? It's like, it doesn't make any sense, right? So it's going to come from use cases, 100%, solving an actual problem.
Yeah, for sure. I think, unfortunately at the moment, much of the market is purely just hype and speculation. You have these new projects that come out. I mean, I think we're at thousands and thousands of projects. And a lot of them, like you said, some of them, they need to solve a real life problem and have a use case. Otherwise, it's just pure gambling in some respect in terms of from an investor point of view. But in order to really, increase that adoption and get more people involved in the space or actively using these things, then use case is key.
Like, make no mistake about it. I think there's a very good argument to be made that crypto as a whole is a casino, right? And I think that is how most people are using it. And then within the casino, though, there's a couple of things happening that are actual long-term businesses solving real problems. But unfortunately, for the most part, those aren't the ones that we see. Because look, just from a volume standpoint, like the amount of people that are into crypto for the hope of financial freedom and talking about coin projections and these sorts, they vastly outnumber the people that are here that are like innovators that want to solve an actual problem. There's just way more of those people. They're much louder. That's so you just don't get I think if you're an outsider looking in, it just looks like a massive casino. And by no stretch of the imagination is that like false. Like, it is a massive casino, but if you actually look into the casino and you actually spend some time there, you'll find that there are real problems being solved as well.
Yeah. So let's delve in and talk about that then. Obviously, you've been consulting for a number of different projects.
Yes.
What are you seeing from the companies that you're working with? Like, what are the things that they are struggling with? How are they kind of looking to bring their projects to market? What's the kind of different? What's the things you're kind of seeing there, and what's the kind of how are they needing to play it compared to, say, traditional marketing in order for a project to be successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if we're talking about, let's say, what they're struggling with, and I believe you touched on it within the question there, it's they don't understand that you need to have a go-to-market strategy, or rather they understand it, but they don't really know where to start. It's like they just know that, hey, we're launching this thing in 2 months. And what you'll find is that the vast majority of people that are building in crypto, they are engineers. Probably 80-90% of people. And engineers are really great at some things, and they're really fucking terrible at some other things, such as explaining what the hell the problem is that they're solving and making people understand. Like, there are so many Web3 projects where you go to the website and you can't figure out what they do. And then when you find out what they do, you go, oh, why don't you just say that? Like, you should have just said that, because that most people understand, right? So I think communicating to the masses, they do a terrible job of. The other thing that they don't really understand is for the most part, in my experience, they don't have a good grasp of human behavior and psychology. Like they don't understand people very well, right? So they're great at writing code and they're great at solving problems and like really intelligent, but a lot of times they're lacking that side. And so that's what, marketing is really the foundation of marketing really comes from that. Like if you understand people, if you understand human behavioral biology, if you understand sociology, if you understand psychology, you're going to understand how people behave. And through your understanding of that, you can start with a blank canvas. You don't have to see what anybody else has done, and you can come up with effective marketing strategies because of your understanding. And so, I just find that they're great at one thing, which is what they do, which is engineering, and they're not so good at marketing. And so they're really just there isn't a plan in place that's likely to work. And so, that's why they come to people like myself, because I put out content where I sort of describe what they have to think about. And the conversations that I'm having are like, I just didn't know that like it went this deep and that these are the kinds of things that I need to think about. And so, let me dig in. I'll dig into some of those things, especially maybe how it differs to Web 2 and Web 3. And I've written about this. I've made videos about this. So the first thing that people need to understand, specifically if you're transitioning from Web 2 to Web 3, and this is like a marketer's wet dream, what I'm about to say here. So let me ask you, Charlie, if you have a consulting company with two owners, or if you have an SEO agency with two owners, who benefits? Let's say you have an SEO agency, and let's say there's two owners, and let's say that there's, just for argument's sake, 20 employees. Who benefits when the company does well?
It's the owners, both of the owners. Yeah.
Right? There's two owners. So there's two people that really give a shit about the success of this company, no matter how many people are involved. So let's say, just again, for argument's sake, there's two owners, there's 20 employees, and although this would be completely undoable, let's say there's 1,000 clients. The only people that benefit from the company doing well are the two owners, not the employees, not the owners, not the clients. Nobody else really benefits from it. And this structure is actually the same in crypto, but the difference is, instead of two owners, how many people benefit from Bored Ape Yacht Club doing well? 10,000 PFPs. How many people benefit from that?
Everyone, pretty much.
Right. Now, there's not 10,000 unique owners, but
everyone that's involved.
People. And actually, it's much more than that, right? Because they have the Ape coin as well, right? So there's probably hundreds of thousands of wallets. So if you look at that, you say, there's two people in this organization that are really incentivized for this company to do well, which is why managers struggle with incentivizing their employees to work hard, because there is no incentive. They get their paycheck. There might be performance bonuses, but they don't have ownership in the company, so they're not going to get a piece of the upside if they do a better job. Go to a crypto project. Again, we can take Bored Ape Yacht Club as an example. 10,000, NFTs. Now they have the Ape coin. Other side, I think, was the Landies. So I don't even know what the number is. Let's say there's possibly 500,000 people who have some kind of ownership in the Bored Ape Yacht Club ecosystem. Again, if we come back to human behavior biology, and Charlie Munger understands this, he has a great quote where he says, "Show me the incentive, I'll show you the outcome." Human people, or human beings, we take action based on our incentives, right?
Yeah.
So if you have 500,000 people who are incentivized for an organization to do well, or if you have two people who are incentivized for an organization to do well, which one do you think is going to do better, just based on that?
Exactly. The one that's got far more people involved in it.
Right. Because what happens is that they go out there and they can't shut up about it. They can't shut up about this project, because whether they know it or not, it's in their best interest to spread the word, to explain it to people, to get other people to buy into it. Incentives are aligned with way more people than in a typical sort of small business. And like in Web 2, like most companies are small businesses. Like probably 99% or 97% or something like that are small businesses with like one or two or three or maybe five people who really give a shit. But most crypto projects have 10,000, 50,000, 100,000, a million people who are incentivized for a project to do well. So the incentives really, they're just in your favor. Like word of mouth marketing is the best type of marketing that you can have, right? Because it's free. So in Web3, you get it inherently. Like you get it inherently by giving people a piece of the ownership, right? So that's really like one of the main things that people need to understand. And then we can talk about, let's say like token prices, NFTs. These are things that are traded on the open market, right? Which means that much like a stock, it's made up of two components, and that is intrinsic value and perceived value. And those two components together is going to land on some type of price, and that's what the thing is going to be worth. Now, getting a bit blurry here, right? I think it'll come back. There we go. So what happens with that is in Web 2, again, a small business, which is going to be most cases, like the perceived value is really more about like the product. How can you increase the perceived value? But in Web 3, one of your big jobs is really about increasing the perceived value of the project as a whole by getting people to buy into the idea, to the vision, to what you're trying to solve. That's how you get people to sort of come in and spend resources on your project, whether that's time investment, whether it's money, going out there and talking about it. So one of the easy examples that I like to sort of drive this home is they've done blind taste tests, right, between Coca-Cola and Pepsi, and Pepsi is the better product. So if you remove the labels from the cans or the bottles, we would go for Pepsi because it is, on a blind taste test, it's a better product. So that's the intrinsic value. So if you put them side by side, you'd have like Coca-Cola here and Pepsi here, like it's higher, right? Yet when you and I go to the store and we want to buy some Coke, we're going to buy Coca-Cola. Now, why is that? If
Still there,
you
Robert?
put the two... Did you lose me?
A little bit. You may have cut out there.
Yeah, we froze a bit. Yeah, so I'll recap that last part, which was that, again, if you remove the labels, we go to a store, we're just going to pick Pepsi, right? Because it's the better product. So that's the intrinsic value. So the intrinsic value of Pepsi is slightly higher than Coca-Cola. They've done the blind taste test. We know this. Now, the truth is that when most people go to the store, they're actually going to buy Coca-Cola, which as a marketer, that is so fascinating to me. It's like, if we remove the labels, you buy Pepsi. You put the label on it, which didn't really change the product at all of a sudden you're going to buy Coca-Cola. Well, why is that? The perceived value. And so Coca-Cola has really been programming, and if you watch their commercials, you'll see this. It's all happiness is what they're selling, right? So they've tied their product to an emotion, which is happiness. And they do that through various things. They try to associate with Santa Claus, right? There's those commercials from back in the day. And if you listen to the music, it's like, something's coming, something's coming. There's that anticipation of something great is coming. And also, if you look at a lot of their ads these days, which I think are less sort of Christmas based, they're all leading up to this moment of cracking open the Coke or like popping it open and having that first sip. Now, what is that about? If you think about that for a second, that's about dopamine. So dopamine is the response, the chemical response to the anticipation of a reward, not to the reward itself. So it's the lead up to the reward. That's why they say the best moment when you take a drug is the moment right before. It's the anticipation, right? And they've done really interesting studies on this where they taught a monkey to perform some kind of activity in exchange for a reward. And then they measure the dopamine response on the monkey. And then they started, so like the monkey did the activity, and every time they did the activity, they got the reward. And then they said, well, what if we only gave it to them like 50% of the time? What's going to happen to dopamine response? What if we give it to them 25% of the time? What's going to happen to dopamine? Or 75%? And what they found was when they gave the reward 50% of the time was when the dopamine response was highest, and it was significantly higher than when the monkey got the reward every single time. And so, as we know, dopamine is incredibly addictive, right? That's why we're checking our phones. That's why we're using, nicotine. That's why we're, smoking cigarettes. That's why we're, drinking alcohol, doing drugs, because dopamine is released. Checking social media, the notifications, dopamine. So Coca-Cola has really built on that. And so that is kind of I'm digging into the weeds here a bit, but the perceived value makes up for the lack of intrinsic value in the Coca-Cola versus Pepsi and scenario. So as a marketer, when you think about your crypto project, that is, I am not saying, by the way, that people should skimp out on the intrinsic value or like mail it in. I'm saying that that is table stakes. You need to have a great product to even get a seat at the table. You have to solve a real problem. It's got to be a real, a great product. That is now table stakes. But if you want to be above your competitors, let's say, then the perceived value, and really, it's actually about the perceived future value, because that's what people are really getting into it for, right? People aren't buying Bitcoin for 19K because they think it's going to go to 14. They're buying it because they think it's going to go to 1 million, right? And so that's really what breaks down, the floor price of an NFT project. The market cap is like the perceived value plus the intrinsic value. And so people have to make that distinction and understand that in Web 2, it was mostly really about the intrinsic value. So it was all product, all sales and marketing. And now, that's kind of changed a little bit. And so it's about, other elements that come into play here. So to continue on that note, the competitive advantage between companies, I believe, is also changed because of all these underlying things that we've discussed so far. So in Web 2, and not even just for internet companies, but the competitive advantage was really like having a great product and having good marketing and sales. I think if you did those things, you were going to be successful. Apple's not like an internet company, but they had the best product, which was the iPhone. And then they had actually very good marketing and sales, and they crushed it, right? And that was the case for many Web 2 companies. But the other thing that we covered here in the beginning is that Web 3, for the most part, is decentralized, which also means that a lot of projects are open source. So the code is available to you. And what is the result of that? Well, it means that somebody tomorrow could come in and take the project that you spent 4 years building and make a copy of it.
Yeah.
And you openly invited them to do that, and I'm not against that at all. I think that's better for society as a whole. That's why Elon Musk wanted to make Twitter open source, right? So if you play that scenario out, well, let's say I have a decentralized exchange, right, where you can exchange cryptocurrency. There's no one centralized owner. It's just owned by the people who hold the token. Well, that's going to be open source. And tomorrow there's going to be 15 forks, as they call it in the industry, right? You can fork a product or copy it. So, well, what happens if you play that out? What happens if every day your great product is being copied 15 times, new brands popping up with the same product, and they're changing their marketing? Well, what happens is you're all competing for the same customers, and you're all basically competing on, well, you can't compete on the product anymore because they've all got the same product and they're copying it overnight. So how can you compete on that anymore? Well, in my opinion, sorry, I have like bronchitis or something. The whole family has bronchitis.
Oh, no.
So I think what's going to happen is, the way to phrase the question to sort of solve this problem is, well, what is difficult to copy? What's hard to copy? And I think if you think about that, I think branding and community are always going to be difficult to copy. And so that's going to set projects apart. And I'm adding something here now that I haven't really outlined in any of my videos or something before. But I also think just the management of the organization, right? So the operation side. So people that are great operators of a business, that's also going to be, and has always been, a competitive advantage, but that's going to remain. But branding and community, if you can just fork the product 15 times a day, I think those are the things that are difficult to copy. It takes time. And so that's going to set projects apart. And I need to actually dig into those as well, because these are terms that people have heard, but in my opinion, most people do not actually understand them. And I also, as I started teaching this, teaching is great because you find out where the gaps are in your own knowledge. And so even when I thought about it, it's not like I just inherently or like intuitively knew exactly how to explain what they were when I first started thinking about this. I had to like do some research and really think about it and come to a conclusion that like, okay, what is community? So I'll start off with what community is not. And so you hear the word community in crypto all the time. It's completely overused by people who heard the term and they like everyone's talking about it. But again, most people don't actually know what community is. So what it gets confused with primarily, and Celsius, which you brought up earlier, was they showed me one of the ways that it gets confused, where they froze everybody's withdrawals, basically fuck over all of their customers. And the CEO came out on Twitter and was like, yeah, we got to do this. But like, thank God we have such a loving, supportive community who understands this difficult time. We'll get through this together. And the comment section is full of people who are like, hey, give my fucking money back. That is not a community. You're talking about customers. You're just talking about, you're just providing a service to them. There's no strong Celsius community. What are you talking about? It's not a community. Those are just people using your product. Okay. That is not the same thing. So that's the first thing that community gets confused with, customers. It's not the same thing. The other thing that community gets confused with, which I had a call with the venture capital fund, and the guy was like, oh yeah, here's how we grow community. And he's like pretty successful. He's been in crypto for a long time. He's like, here's how we grow community. And he starts to tell me how they hire these Indian people to like grow their Twitter following with like shitty social media followers. I'm like, oh, I go, oh, I didn't say this, but I was like, oh, you think that social media followers is community. I was like, no, that's not it. Social media followers have value. If we come back to the perceived value, which we talked about as one of the components, that is one of the signals that we use to give value to things, right? How many other people give a shit about this person or this product or project? Well, that has value. So I'm not saying that social media followers don't have value. They actually do. But it is not community. So what is community? Community, in my opinion, the way that I think about it, is it's a group of people that have a shared common goal or sort of core desire in life. They're on the same journey. Like they got this one thing that they want in life, like more than anything else. And that's a journey that they're on. So you and I were in, SSM, which is, we don't have to dig into it, but that was a community, and that's where we first met. That, our good friend Tim, he did an excellent job making a community, or really putting a bunch of people in a room together that wanted the same thing in life, which was freedom. Like that's what we all wanted at that time, and that's why. You and I are still friends. You are probably still talking on a daily basis with some of the other people that was in this community, right? Yep. How many other communities have you been a part of where that's the case?
Very few.
Honest question.
Yeah. No. Very. I always say that community in particular is the only one
that stuck.
That really stuck, and where I have, lifelong friends from that community.
Yes. And if you boil it down, the reason is because Tim did an excellent job at defining a core desire, and really everything that he said, everything that came out of his mouth was about getting that core desire, freedom. So when he put us in a room together, and I still remember the first guy that I met was Alan Poon. I don't know if you've met him. He's a great guy from Hong Kong.
Actually recently. Yeah.
Recently, okay. Yeah. So he was the first guy that I met in real life from the community. And I just remember like, holy shit, like the amount of things that him and I have in common is absolutely astonishing. Like this is like an Asian version of me. Like this guy is just, we are literally on the same path in life. We want the exact same things in life. We value the same things. We care about the same things. And so that's what community is built on. And if people want to like understand this better, because the way to take this information and sort of practically use it, I've written about it and I have a video about it. But what it really boils down to is Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, he wrote about this in the 1950s, where there's like different archetypes. And if you look at Hollywood movies, you can find that there's 12 different archetypes, and each archetype basically has one core desire, one thing they want above all else, and they're optimizing their entire life for this one thing. So some of those things are like wealth and power. That's like Michael Corleone from The Godfather. There's freedom, which is like Walter Mitty, where he I forget if he like quits his job or gets fired and he starts traveling around the world. There's security and belonging. This is like my wife, for example. Like that's security for, the health of my family. And like, that's all she cares about. She optimizes her entire life around that. And so if you think about a movie that was Jonah Hill and Michael Cera in Superbad, they just wanted to be like part of the cool kids club. Like that's all they cared about. And they would go to pretty extreme lengths to do that. And that's the thing. People will go to such crazy lengths to get this one core desire that they want. And that's why those communities that nail it are so strong. That's why. Because it's such a hardcore desire that's hardwired. And a lot of times it's the thing that we've been all thinking about for like the last 10 years. And so it's like ingrained in us so hardcore. And so like those are some of the ones. Then there's like, Ocean's 11, which was built on revenge. So he took his wife, and so his revenge was, hey, let's rob these casinos. And I think Fight Club fits into the same archetype there, which is more kind of like rebel against society kind of thing. So in any case, I have a list of all the 12 with movie examples and what the one core desire is. But if you're building a community, it's really going to start with defining or getting clear on what is the one core desire that we're really building this thing on. And then you can kind of reverse engineer from there. What do we talk about? How do our events look like? What about our AMAs that we do? It's really derived from that. And Harley Davidson, I think, is a good, let's say, non-Web3 example where there's a massive community. And the biker community is built on freedom, right? And so bikers, when two bikers pass each other on the road, they wave to each other. That's community. Where you see somebody else that you don't know and you wave to them. That's because of a strong community. So they're on the bike, so that's a signal. They've got the vests on with the different gangs or like the sub communities. They've got biker bars, which is like the hangout spot. Those are kind of like the surface level things. But the fact that they wave to each other when they don't know each other, that's like the ultimate sign of like, hey, this is an incredibly strong community. These are people who want the exact same things in life. And so if you're Celsius and people are just using your product to store their crypto, that is not a community. It's not built on a shared core desire. It's just people using your product because they're solving a problem, right?
Yeah, it's interesting with Celsius because I was a customer. I was a customer of Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point I had a very large share of my crypto on Celsius. So I believe they were doing certain things right. They did have that community feel. However, and it was almost like they portrayed it as us against them, which was us against the traditional banking institutes.
Right.
But as soon, I think the area that they were missing, or the area that they fell on, was as soon as trust is lost, then that's it. That can ruin a community.
Oh yeah.
So I think there were certain things that they did that were good. However,
it just wasn't strong enough.
It wasn't strong enough, and as soon as their effectively their intrinsic value just completely crashed and burned. In that respect.
Both their intrinsic and their perceived value.
And their perceived fell off a cliff after as well. So it's really interesting about finding that starting off with that kind of common goal, and it's kind of the reverse, because in a normal situation with where it's company and customer, you're focusing on just providing
solving a problem.
You're not adding in the benefit of how can you actually give them some ownership of that solution as such,
or how can you make it so these people would absolutely die to have a beer together? That would be like one of the best nights in their life.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think how the space kind of evolves with this, and for sure, interesting.
So let me sorry to interject here again, but I just want to finish.
No, it's good.
The speech.
Good. Yeah, no, for sure.
So the last thing we talked about community, right? So the next thing is branding, and if you think about branding, and if you do your research, we've all heard the term, right? And I think for some of us, it might be like, oh yeah, That means the logo, that means the tagline, that means the design. That's not what branding is about. Branding is not about the visual look per se. That's going to contribute to what branding really is. And what branding really boils down to is, how do you make people feel? Come back to Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They've tied the emotion of happiness to the product. And that's what branding is. And so that perceived value that makes up for the intrinsic value, it's branding. That's where the value comes from in the Coca-Cola case, right? And I actually found a great sort of pie chart that showed, because this feeling, if you really think about it, we just talked about the archetypes and what they want. So like power and wealth, or happiness, or freedom. You can usually derive a feeling straight out of that. You know what I mean? So how does there's a great pie chart that shows like the 12 different archetypes and a brand that we all know and the feeling that they're trying to convey. And I found it to be pretty accurate. And so one of the archetypes is the ruler, and that's, again, Michael Corleone, House of Cards with Kevin Spacey, the person who wants like power and wealth. And basically, if you think about it, the feeling that a person who wants power and wealth, the feeling that they want to have is control. That's what power and wealth gives you, right? Control of the outcome. Because power and wealth are resources to get some sort of outcome. And so that it's control. And so Hugo Boss is the brand that they put on the sort of pie chart. And guess what? I love Hugo Boss. And I never really put my finger on it. But the reason why is because partially the ruler archetype definitely is one that I identify more with. And so that's why Hugo Boss is a brand that I also am really into, right? So that's what branding really is. I guess we don't really have to. I honestly think once I made that distinction, I really think it does. I don't want to sort of pat myself on the back, but I think once you rephrase branding to how do you make people feel, and that you just need to distill it to one really desired feeling that they want, that's like 90% of the work, right? Because then it's just about going out there and kind of reverse engineering. How do we sort of reinforce this or sort of continuously communicate this? But if you take the time to just think about that for like half an hour, you're going to be so much better off than somebody who doesn't think about it at all because they didn't understand that, hey, it was about this. So yeah, that was an incredibly long speech to kind of outline some of the things that you have to think about when it comes to, Web3 marketing. So yeah, I took up a lot of time here, but I think
no, it's really, really
some value
good
out of it.
Yeah, no, powerful stuff. I'm sure anyone that is involved in a crypto project or running a crypto project is going to get an enormous amount of value from that.
Or somebody who wants to just fork an existing project and go and crush it. And by the way, so let me just one final thing, just to give a very sort of concrete example of this playing itself out. So Uniswap, which I think you and I are both familiar with, is a decentralized exchange, right? You can go change your crypto, but it's not owned by any company or whatever, right? SushiSwap comes along. I believe they forked the product. I'm not 100% sure if they forked the product, but the point is they made a similar product, but then they made a slightly better offer. They made a slightly better offer to the people that were putting their money into the exchange, which is liquidity that's used to make sure that the market making, works the way that it should. And so they just, I think they've worked the product. They made a slightly better offer. In 1 week, they went from $0 to $1 billion of liquidity. That's not a valuation. That's not market cap. That's $1 billion worth of actual money that transferred from Uniswap to SushiSwap. $1 billion sitting in the platform in 1 week since inception.
Wow. Yeah, that's pretty insane, isn't it?
So how do you prevent that from happening to your project? Community and branding, long term.
Obviously, you talked about community and branding. What's your thoughts on strong leadership? Having a leader that is who's running the project that is very public. Any thoughts on that? because you have some projects you don't even know who is running the company. You have versus other projects like Ethereum, Vitalik.
Yep.
You've got Cardano with Charles. I know these. When you name certain projects, you know who runs the company. What's your thoughts on that? Do you think that's going to be integral to the success of a project? Is there any a competitive advantage for someone to be more of a public figure if they're running a project like that?
It's a great question. So what I think is, which you pointed out, is that you can succeed, at least in the short term, without it, right? There are many projects that have crushed it and nobody really knows who's behind it. And I think where that happens is, we talked about Uniswap and SushiSwap. And so I believe that's the case, right? I'm not like, super deep into those, but I'm not sure if people know exactly who's behind those. And so I think if somebody just makes a better offer and there's no let me kind of rephrase here because I'm mumbling. I believe that having a charismatic leader can be very helpful in building a community. And as we've talked about, community is one of the things that you can use as a shield to protect yourself from this happening. So I believe that if when there isn't, it might be a little bit harder to actually build a community. I don't think it's impossible, but when there is a strong charismatic leader, I think it's more likely that if everything's congruent and you've done the things that I've talked about here, then I think it's going to be easier to build a community, and then you can use that as the moat to prevent the things to happen to you that happened with Uniswap and SushiSwap. And so I think the charismatic leader is really a part of the community more so than, because SushiSwap came up and they just made a better offer, right? And so because there was a better offer, people were like, hey, I'm taking the better offer. Like, why wouldn't I? So there wasn't enough, loyalty from those people that moved over. And a lot of the loyalty, a lot of the loyalty comes as a result of a strong community. So I don't think you have to have a leader to have a successful crypto project, but just kind of based on the evidence so far, I think it can be incredibly helpful in building a strong community, which again can be one of the moats that you have around your business to really protect itself and really get long-term success. And so I think that's like the one thing that crypto, we need more time to see some of these things play out, because a lot of projects have short-term success. Like, how many graphs have you seen that look like this on CoinMarketCap, right? A lot.
Yeah.
Because it's not that hard to just make a slightly better offer and get people to come over, but how do you get them to stay? And so again, we talked about it, community and branding. But so I think if we talk about the sort of charismatic leader, I think that's the box where that plays into. It's like getting people to stay, because people resonate with people. We don't resonate with like a logo the same way that we resonate with a person. So yeah, I really think that that's where you can have that's the importance of having a charismatic leader. So it's not 100% necessary, but it can be very helpful in sort of the long-term moat and success of a project.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's very like I said, it ties in with community for sure.
Yeah, because I also think like there's like potential risks, like if you build an entire project sort of based on a person, but what happens when that person like retires or dies or something like that? So you don't really want a project to be like entirely built on a single person, but if they can amplify what's there. And you take like UFC and Dana White, for example, like I think about what's going to happen to UFC when Dana White, I don't know if he would ever retire, but what if he died, right? What would happen to UFC? I don't know. Like I doubt that it would continue as strong as it has been for the last decade. So you want to be mindful of that. I think a charismatic person can add to the business, but they also bring some liability with what if we remove this person?
Yeah. I think where I see also of benefit is I don't know if you're familiar with the Hex community. They have a very kind of charismatic leader. He's a bit polarizing, called Richard Hart, and they released Hex, and then he's releasing other projects, but because it's all under that Hex ecosystem, every project that he is a part of he's already got kind of a loyal following, and there's trust there. Therefore, a lot of these other projects are likely to do very well, because he has he's got the results with Hex has increased, I think by 10,000% or something crazy like that. I don't know the exact numbers, but so I think there's value in that. But like you said, it's what happens when if that leader is no longer in place. I would imagine those projects don't last very long.
Yeah, because I also think that the leader, it comes back to the perceived value in a way, right? So if you think of Cardano, for example, Cardano has, I don't remember the number. I think their market cap now is like 15 billion, and it was probably like, do you know what it was at the top? It was a lot.
Remember. Yeah.
It was a lot. Like it was top 3 or something, right?
Yeah. It got to, I think at one point it was top 3. Yeah. And since then it just went down and down.
Like everything else. But the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the perceived value of the project has been, factored into the price of the token. And so massive value, right? And so then when you break it down to intrinsic value and perceived value, Charles Hoskinson is actually a great marketer. When you study what he's talking about, he's actually a really great marketer. Specifically, what he's doing is, we talked about like the future perceived value, because he's talking about, hey, we're going to go to Africa, we're going to solve all these things. And so his vision gets people to buy into the idea. And then when you really look at, one of the things that I look at to try to form an opinion about what's going to happen to a certain token, and specifically if I think about like ecosystems or blockchains that people are building on, Masari.io track all the fundraising activity in the crypto space. And I looked this up the other day. So there's about 3,100 VC funded crypto projects that have been tracked. I'm sure there's a couple that slipped through the cracks. How many of those projects do you think are built on Cardano out of 3,100? Take a guess.
Not many. Knowing my knowledge of Cardano, probably.
You'd be correct. It's 8.
Okay. I was closer.
you were close. So out of 3,100 VC funded projects, and mind you, VCs are very intelligent. They vet projects. They see a lot of projects. They put their money where they think they're going to have success, right? That says something to me that like, all right, the price is probably mostly perceived value. It comes from the charismatic leader he's incredibly articulate. I used to watch his videos when I got into it to like learn more about everything. And I didn't buy the token, but I was like, I bought into the idea, right? I'm like, oh, look at all these things they're trying to do. Like this thing is going to blow up. And then when I really come back to like, to me, I think if I look at blockchains and which one's going to succeed, I look at, well, what are people building on? Like what are people building on? Because that's where you're going to have one of those use cases we talked about that just blows it out of the water, where it becomes, huge. So.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. It's there is many projects like that that high perceived value and the intrinsic value may be lacking for sure.
Yeah.
So, good stuff, Robert. Well, any kind of final thoughts that you would like to share? Anything that you're kind of particularly working on at the moment that you'd like to kind of get across? And
I guess I would say for the people who aren't in the space, it's hard to convince people, because really the way that people get into the space is they find something that piques their curiosity, right? So for me, it was this idea of buying tokens in people, right? Buying ownership in, like, let's say a creator or something like that. So that was what the hell is it called? It's called DASO now, Decentralized Social. It was called something else. It slipped my mind. But that was the project that got me in. And for you as well, like there was always a project that gets you into it. So it's really hard to like convince people. But I just don't see a world where this doesn't continue to grow. So I would just kind of urge people to like find something in the Web3 space that you are kind of interested in, and just kind of like start spending a little bit of time doing your homework, like watching some there's great YouTube videos that explain different concepts and stuff. And I just don't think people are going to lose out by spending 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a week like getting educated on the space. And for Web3 people, I actually haven't announced this yet, but because it's all kind of in construction, but some of the things that we talk about here, I think, are going to help a lot of projects in crypto. And so I'm basically putting together what I want to be the go-to resource for people who want to learn about crypto marketing. So that just articles, case studies, directories of marketing agencies if you're looking for an external partner, maybe like directories of launch pads where people can launch their project. We're going to have marketing jobs. If people are hiring a marketer, should be able to come there. We're going to have courses. So I'm basically just building like a go-to resource for all things crypto. And you can find that at kingmaking.xyz, which, by the way, quick side note here. So Kingmaking, I'll reveal some behind the scenes secrets, is built on an archetype. I started with the archetype first. I'm like, okay, who are the people that we're trying to attract here? And then I came up with Kingmaking. And I don't know if you're aware of this, because I know you're from the UK, but in the 1400s, there was a guy, they called him Warwick the Kingmaker in the UK. Have you heard of this guy?
Yeah, I have not.
So
no.
What's really interesting about Warwick is he was never king, but he was the guy with the political connections, and he had the real power. So he put people on the throne. So he kind of had these like puppets that he would put them on the throne through his connections and everything. So he was the real guy who was running the country, but you had a king, and like he was quite unknown. So he's kind of like the guy that behind the scenes who, again, control, Hugo Boss would come. He was the guy in control. And so that's really the thing that I want to give people. Whether you're, so if you're in Web3 and you might be working for a project, whether it's your own project or it's the ability to make somebody a king, make a project into a king. So that's where king making comes from. It's like, you don't necessarily have to be the person, in public. You can be if you want to, but the ability to turn projects into kings, that's what king making is about. So that's where, all of those things that we've talked about today is built on this idea of like, hey, here's how we help people create kings in whatever they're trying to do in crypto.
I like that. Good, nice analogy there.
Yeah,
all ties back to branding.
Yep.
Good
exactly.
stuff. So you obviously mentioned your website there. Are you on any other kind of social platforms? Where else can they kind of absorb your kind of content and knowledge?
Yeah, so I finally found a handle that I could grab on basically every platform possible. So I built on the Kingmaking thing. So by the Kingmaker on Twitter, I believe on Telegram as well, what else is there these days? I don't really spend much time on the other platforms, but yeah, by the Kingmaker, you can usually find me.
Good stuff. All right, thanks, Robert. Appreciate you coming back on the channel again. And until next time, guys, please like, subscribe, and if you'd like to see more of these type of interviews. All right, peace out.
Cool, man. Thanks for having me. Good chat. Talk soon.